All right, well, welcome again to the Grim Wisdom Podcast. Idea, of course, as always, is we're gonna lay some wisdom on you, and it's gonna be so heavy it's gonna crush your soul. With me today are Jared Moffat and Rebecca McGoldrick. They have graciously agreed to be on the podcast. This is our first two-guest podcast.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So you guys should feel honored.
We do.
Indeed.
Truly, the honor is mine. But I thought we could start off by talking a little bit about what you guys do. I mean, I went to a hearing, which was a complete farce, I think is the term we were using. But we went to a hearing to discuss the legalization bill. Or, I mean, I guess we should probably use the messaging of regulate and tax marijuana. Because I don't want to go against your messaging. It just seems like legalizes is, a one-word way of summarizing that, but I don't want to undermine your messaging either. But anyway, for the benefit of the listener, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about how people should be able to buy pot and then smoke it for fun. So yeah, we wrote a bill. We were at the State House. There was a bill. There was a couple of bills actually on offer, and
It was marijuana night.
it was
Right.
marijuana.
That's what they do.
night.
They put all the
Yeah.
marijuana bills on one night. So.
Yeah, just cram them in so that they can get it out of the way, right? It's like any
Right.
other
Yeah.
gruesome,
Right.
unpleasant task. We have to listen to all these assholes and then hold all the bills for further study.
Well,
which
part
is
of the
what we
way
did.
that you can tell that they're not really interested in the discussion is that they let people come up and it's sort of, you can talk about whatever bill you want. So they don't have segmented, okay, for now we're going to talk about this bill and the merits or the cons of this, and then let's move to the next bill. It's like, okay, we're going to have 10 bills heard tonight, and if you want to talk on any of them, just come up and, spew everything you got to say. And, of course, the conversation is then very unstructured, and there's, people making different points that don't match what other people are saying. And
Well, reforms around medical marijuana get thrown in with reforms for tax and regulate, and they all get lumped together, even though they're two different constituencies, sometimes overlapping, but with their own concerns.
Yeah, and each of the issues, deserves its own attention, right? I mean, I think one of the things that frustrates me about the legislature in particular, but I guess the larger public conversation in general as well, is that people don't understand this is actually pretty complicated. A lot of folks think, okay, marijuana is legal or it's not. Well, I mean, there's a lot of things that are legal in society. Tomatoes are legal, tobacco is legal, alcohol is legal, but they can be regulated in much different ways, right? So when you talk about legalizing marijuana, it's not a simple yes or no question. There's many different ways that it could be regulated. There's many different policy questions that come up. Pesticides, how many licenses are there going to be? Is it going to be vertical integration? What are the tax rates going to be? Who's going to be allowed to work here? What do you have to have in order to get a license? I mean, they're all just a million questions, and it just frustrates me to no end because the job of the legislature is to study these things. It's their job to study these policy proposals and have a discussion about them. And you can tell that they're not interested in having that discussion at all. And it's by and large mostly a dog and pony show. The legislators walk in and out of the committee hearing room as they please. I mean, that to me is one of the things that gets under my skin. You might have at the beginning 7 or 8 committee members there, and then when you go up to testify, there's 2 of them, because the others have all stepped out, to go, do whatever they're going to do, and
join.
Yeah.
They all have medical marijuana
Right.
licenses.
Take a
They want
smoke
them.
break,
Yeah.
right. So it's very frustrating, but I appreciate you coming and sticking it out. I think it is an edifying experience, if nothing else.
Yeah, well, I definitely felt edified as all hell. But yeah, so basically, I think you guys are doing some
Not
really-
because you ate an edible marijuana brownie, though, right?
Yeah,
Sorry.
I don't think my consciousness
couldn't
was
resist.
expanded in quite that way.
Okay.
But
Sorry, I couldn't help myself.
it's funny. I remember when I came to Phone Bank for you guys, and I don't want to give the listeners the idea that I am at all pivotal or useful on this issue at all. I have done a very small amount for Jared and Rebecca, and the only justification I can make is that if everybody made that small effort, the problem would be solved, right? But I have certainly not been a hero on this issue or many other issues. Mostly, I just complain a lot. So I don't want you to think that I am using this podcast as some way of promoting my value to humanity, because I don't know that I have one. But but when I was phone banking for you, there was another volunteer there, and I was trying to explain to her how I don't smoke marijuana. I've done it a couple of times. I didn't even personally care for it, but I really believe that it should be legal. And she had trouble understanding the concept, right? Like, well, if you don't use it, then you don't understand the culture. Why would you care about this issue? And it's like, I had to explain, because I care about people that aren't me, right? Interests that aren't mine,
Right.
because we're all connected.
Right.
So, and I think I wanted to talk more about that broader concept about how, because that's demonstration of empathy, right? And I wanted to talk a little bit more about empathy later in the podcast. One of these things we keep coming back to in the podcast is this lack of empathy. But you guys have done. I think you've worked incredibly hard for a lot of years, and you did get. Now we did get last year. We did have some progress, right? We had the Good Samaritan bill finally, right? Or what was that?
Finally.
Yeah.
Well, last year was kind of a nightmare with the Good Samaritan bill as it sunset. It was one of the pieces of legislation left on the table when the House and Senate adjourned for the 2015 session. So it was taken up again in January and passed the beginning of this year.
Okay, great.
Well, I think this is actually really good. Where the drug war and empathy connect is this issue around heroin and opiate use, because in the 80s, right, when the drug war was really getting ramped up, the narrative that was plastered on TV and promoted by the president and the first lady was, we have this crack epidemic, and it's in these urban communities, which is of course code for black communities. And what's the answer? Well, the answer is not compassion. We need to come down with a hammer on these
Violence.
guys, right? And then you see Bill Clinton continue it, with 3 strike laws and mandatory minimums, and we need to be tough, right? Tough on these drugs because they're doing so much harm. But now that you see a bunch of white people, and that's what the statistics bear out, overdosing on opiates and heroin, now all of a sudden it's, we need a public health approach.
Well, and there's even older precedent to look at for something similar is in the 1970s, the reason why New York State decriminalized marijuana initially was a movement of middle class and upper class white parents, frankly, leading this movement because suddenly their children were being were given a record for possession of marijuana, and they didn't really like the way that affected them. So that actually was pioneered in the 1970s.
Right. Yeah. So I think that's very telling. It's like the approach that, the United States takes towards drugs depends on who they perceive as using drugs and who they therefore have empathy for, right? They can have empathy for, a fellow, white working class guy, whatever. Like you hear the police, right? They've come on board now with some of these initiatives to, instead of arrest people, start diverting them to public health services, which is great. I mean, I don't mean to take away from that, but why did they change their mind, right? Why has there been this paradigm shift? Well, because they know people in their own circles that use drugs, and they go, this person isn't a bad person. They struggle with addiction. They have a dependence issue, and that's a disease, right? It's not a moral shortcoming. But when it was, crack is in, the urban communities, that was seen as a moral failing. That was seen as, these are bad people. We need to crush them. And I just think that that's something I try to emphasize to people when we talk about the drug war, because you can't understand the war on drugs without understanding the institutional racism in this country, and globally as well. But particularly here, we were the pioneers of it. And you even had one of Richard Nixon's aide. He said this in 1994, but it recently got some attention. Basically, to paraphrase, one of Nixon's aides says, we launched the war on drugs because we realized we couldn't go after anti-war liberals and blacks, explicitly. So we decided that we were going to ramp up the drug war as a way to target our political enemies.
Yeah.
And he just said that. He said that's why we did it. Like, right? So it's like, well, there it is, folks. Like, what the hell? Like, This isn't about making us safer. This isn't about anything except using the label of criminal, right? Ipso, through drug possession or through drug selling. We're going to use this label of criminal to do the same things we were doing under Jim Crow. We're going to label people as criminals in order to take away their rights. So we're going to disenfranchise you. If you're a felon in some states, you can't vote for the rest of your life. Florida's one of those states. That has an impact on politics, right? Let's disenfranchise these people that we don't like.
Well, and drug laws are unique in that it's a law enforcement gets to decide where and on who they enforce these laws.
Yep.
So it's not like rape or murder where you're trying to find, someone who committed a crime and you're trying to solve a crime. This is going out the most heavily policed communities are communities of color, low-income communities. So, it's not that drug use obviously it's not that drug use isn't happening in affluent white neighborhoods. It's just where are we choosing to put the police cars. It's low-income and community of color.
Yeah, I did. When I was at Brown, how many people did you see, getting arrested for drug use at Brown? None, right? That's
right.
because they're not enforcing the laws on
Right.
Brown's campus or on the east side, right? They're enforcing them in other places.
Yeah. And I'm sorry I had to laugh earlier because it's funny you mentioned rape and murder because clearly the cops also choose, or not just the cops, but the law enforcement engine of which the cops are the vanguard, but not, they're not the only part of that machine. But they also choose which rapes and murders count.
Oh,
which don't.
absolutely.
Sure.
If you're a sex worker that goes missing, well, we're not going to launch an investigation.
Yes, your murder isn't murder, your rape
Yep.
isn't rape.
Yep.
Right.
So, but I think obviously we want to talk about your guys' work, which focuses on the drug issue. But I think, like I said, you could really use this a lot of times. Whenever you start to pick apart a problem, you find that it all is connected to this this
yeah.
tentacle horror that is everywhere and is in everything. It's just another manifestation of a problem that plays itself out, in different ways, but for the same reasons over and over again, across different barriers. But
that's certainly true of the drug war. Another area that is it intersects with immigration, right? Like, so was it last year we had these child refugees from Central America? We still have this going on, of course, but there's this debate: do we help these children, or do we kick them out, or what do we do with them? A total lack of empathy, right? And a total unawareness on the part of the American public that, wait a minute, why are they fleeing those countries? Well, part of the reason that they're fleeing is because we have wrecked them through our economic policies. Part of the reason they're fleeing is because our drug war that we've launched in those countries has created drug cartels that rule by violence. And so they're literally saying, I'd rather risk my life taking a chance on getting to the United States or somehow getting to another country. I'd rather take that than stay where I am in my home country. And we don't have the fucking perspective to go, wait, why are these child refugees here? We just go, well, they could be dangerous. They might hurt us. Well, why are they there in the first place? Like, there's just zero responsibility and accountability to what we do to other people. And then I think it's victim blaming. I think a lot of these things come down to, with the drug war, crack and things like that. Oh, well, it's their fault, right? Well, no, crack was brought in by the U.S. government. There's pretty substantial evidence suggesting that, right? So no, they didn't do this to themselves. You partly made crack available to them, and then you clamped down, right? These child refugees, like, blaming them and blaming the home countries of, well, they're just corrupt, those governments, they need to fix their own problems. Yeah, well, why don't you mention the fact that our foreign policy is all about deposing democratically elected leaders and putting in people that are friendly to our economic interests, right? That's been United States foreign policy for decades. Let's go in, take out the people that are, quote, socialists or actually care about the people, and put in the people that are friendly to our business interests. We don't want those people.
And I think, although I didn't mention we were going to talk about this, I think probably you'll appreciate it. I think that dovetails nicely into a conversation about the U.S. presidential race, because, we have Clinton and Sanders, and it seems quite likely that Clinton will ultimately be the nominee, if for no other reason that, I think she's pretty much willing to have every Bernie delegate lined up and shot at the convention. If that's what it takes to secure the nomination.
Oh, Jesus.
But,
right.
Well, that's something else I always talk about, is that one problem that progressives, and like one problem that you have when you have empathy, is it's always sort of viscerally shocking to be confronted with somebody who truly does not have it, right? And like, you know, when you're analyzing like the power dynamic, whether it's global power, whether it's local power, whether it's state power, when you're looking at our state government is a great example, but, you know, there are these people who insist on rules and the rule of law, but they only do that because that's where their power is rooted, right? All of these guys up on Capitol Hill, I mean, they're mostly lawyers and heirs, right? So their entire existence comes from an unjust rule set. So they're fanatical in their passion for defending that rule set that says, yes, my mommy died, so I get her stuff, right? And that's sacrosanct. Yes, you know, I am a lawyer, so the law says that I can dump toxic waste in my backyard. Yeah, I wrote it, but, you know, the point is the law says it, so they talk about the rule of law. But the interesting thing is that if you ever do find a way to turn the tables on them, right, and you use the law as an instrument to push them away from their agenda, they have no true commitment to the rules.
Oh, of course.
Right? There comes this tipping point when they've been pushed to the point of desperation, and then they threw everything out the window, and their plan becomes kill everybody, cow everyone with fear and violence, right? Mainly fear at the state level, right? Because I don't think it's necessary to start mowing down Rhode Islanders. But I think it's always a mistake to count on too much humanity or too much compassion from the ruling class, right? Because the reason they're the ruling class is because they lack compassion, right? So
it's the same thing. The rule of law, also with, you know, civility, right? It's used the same way.
You can't see this, but he's holding up.
Yeah, I'm doing air quotes. But you know, that's another example of what you're talking about, where if you know, civility serves the interests of power, then they're quick to say, hey, let's have civil discourse, right? But then they're happy to turn around and do things that are totally barbaric to other people if they need to, right? So that's another where they use these justifications when they're convenient, but they certainly aren't consistent.
Right. I mean, it's hard for people who are, I don't want to say principle driven because that sounds like something the author of The Secret would say, but people who sit down and they think about themselves, they deconstruct their lives. I mean, you're a philosophy student, so, you know, at some point you figured out, wait, I should probably worry about whether I'm ever going to make any money in this, but
so we got involved in community organizing.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Well, good thing, Rebecca talked me out of, you know, being a philosopher because, it's not a very practical route to pursue.
Well, what can I say, man? You married up.
Yeah. That's right.
So getting back to Clinton and Sanders for a minute, you know, we have this thing where we're all being told now, the overwhelming narrative is that the primary is over, which may be so in terms of like who's going to be the nominee, although I still think, you know, if you're really committed to the principles of democracy, then you would honor the forms of democracy, right? But I think as a practical matter, it's liable we'll be stuck with Clinton as the nominee, right? And so all we're hearing is that Bernie voters need to unify. They need to submit to the new reality, which is that Clinton is the winner and that they're going to have to hold their noses and vote for her because of whatever scare tactic it is that we're going to be subjected to, right? And, you know, looking at past elections, it's going to be the Supreme Court, especially with this ridiculous thing. And that's also a self-inflicted wound, right? Because, you know, LBJ, say what you will about LBJ, and you can say a lot negative about LBJ. LBJ got the 1968 Civil Rights Act passed, and I don't think anybody else could have got those Civil Rights Act passed. And he didn't do it. He didn't do it by compromise and incrementalism. He did it by being just a brutal, ruthless son of a bitch. He used every dirty trick he could. When he signed the bill, he said, we lost the South for a generation. He was actually understating the case. We've lost the South for at least 2 generations and counting, right? But you know, we couldn't proceed. I think that by any standard, the Civil Rights Act was a tremendous tremendously positive step in the history of the 20th century in America that would not have happened without LBJ. And, Obama should be doing something similar to the Supreme Court justice, but he's been content to allow the Republicans to obstruct him, right? And I think in part that's because they know they need this issue as a football to get their sorry-ass candidate elected. But the irony is, as I think Facebook, we can talk about Facebook in a bit, but I get a lot of my news from Facebook. But I always fact check it if it's something like this that's unbelievable. But although this is unbelievable, so Bill Clinton appointed Donald Trump's sister to the federal district court. So she's a federal judge. So
I didn't know that.
yes, and this is actually true. This is not something I made up. I fact checked this. It's not some wild conspiracy thing. But Donald Trump's sister is a federal judge, and so. I mean, probably it wouldn't actually happen, but it's conceivable that Clinton and Trump would nominate the same person for the Supreme Court for the same reason, because they're connected to money, right? And so you're going to be told all these scare tactics. It's like 20 years ago, it was perfectly okay to nominate Trumps to the Supreme to high judgeships, to give them life and death power over Americans, right? It was totally okay to reward family money with federal judgeships, right? And that was under Hillary's husband. Now, we've heard about it supposedly sexist to judge her by her husband's standard. I mean, I think you could just go by the things that she's publicly said, both then and now and since. You don't need to go into that. But the point is, we're going to be told that. It's going to be screaming from every place on high, right? And especially people who are affluent, right? Like affluent, famous people. I understand, like George Takei put out a video about how we should all just vote for Hillary, even though he's a Sanders supporter. And it's like, that's easy for you to say, George. You're rich, you're famous, you're gonna die soon, and you already got your cookie, right? You got gay marriage, which is great. Now, not that gay marriage is just a cookie, but like, it's a social issue that Hillary vehemently opposed for a long time, and then after it was politically unfeasible, she switched, right? Along with many other issues that we could name. And, George Takei doesn't have to worry, like, for example, Social Security, right? So they've already, under Obama, made inflation changes to Social Security that ensure that the benefit won't be meaningful by the time we retire, right? It'll already be eroded to inflation because the new changes make sure that the benefit will not keep pace with inflation, right? So there's that, right? But then on top of that, every year we hear every Republican and many Democrats trying to find some way to, quote, save Social Security without ever raising the cap, ever. Because you can't do that, right? Yeah. Because that's the obvious solution that every American wants, but you can't do that no matter what, because God forbid that rich people have to pay anything, right? So we got to cut benefits, we got to reduce eligibility. So we're not going to get Social Security. George Takei's already got Social Security, right? He'll die long before inflation erodes it, even though he's in apparently amazing shape, right? Student loans. George Takei doesn't have any student loans anymore, right? I mean, raise your hand if you have an untenable student loan, right? Like, whose hand is up? So, everybody's. So, and you can't bankrupt out of them. You can't do anything about them. You just have to pay them. And if you don't pay them for long enough, they start leaning your property, they start leaning your taxes, right? They find ways
take your passport.
Right, they find ways to take your money, right? Even if it's a private student loan. The government says, well, these are so important that we have to grant them, we have to essentially collect them on behalf of the creditors.
Right.
Which, there were some news reports last year of how in certain, like southwestern states, I want to say it was Arizona.
Oh, the U.S. Marshals?
Yeah, the U.S. Marshals were going out and arresting people for not paying their student loans.
Oh, right, yeah.
Yeah.
I remember that.
So, it's like, how is this a good use of taxpayer funds? Let the banks hire their own goons, right?
Well, we only support Bernie Sanders because we're really privileged. I mean, that's why we support him, right? Like, because, to not support Hillary Clinton, I think, is really to betray just an enormous amount of privilege. That's what I'm told. Is that not right?
I mean, it's like, why why would you vote for somebody that offers you nothing? It's like I tried this analogy out on Rebecca and Jared before the podcast. They're going to have to hear it again because the listeners haven't heard it. But the way I think about it, it's like analogous to slavery. Not that slavery was obviously slavery as an institution, chattel slavery is so horrible. You really can't compare anything to the magnitude of that abomination. Even the Holocaust. I think if you really look at what chattel slavery actually was in America, Holocaust is a distant second. But politically speaking, there was at one time two parties in the country. I think it was like the Democrats and the Whigs, right? And they both wanted to keep slavery, but one of them wanted a more benign version of slavery where free blacks had some rights, right? Well, if I want to end the institution of slavery, I don't want to vote for a candidate that wants a more benign version of slavery, right? And if I want to end like the economic system that's destroying us, I don't want to vote for a candidate that's totally invested in it with some very minor tweaks in terms of reforms, right? And if you can even believe those, because, you can't, because when has Hillary not changed her position based on political expediency?
Right.
Show me a point where she ever stuck to her guns in defiance of a headwind,
Yeah, well, I mean, we have been told. What I think the Hillary camp is trying to do is they feel like they don't need to convince Bernie supporters to support Hillary. They feel like entitled, right, to well, of course you have to vote for Hillary Clinton, because if you don't, then you're going to have, Trump blood on your hands. Right. And that's been the narrative, I think, for a while, is this argument that, if, again, this is why you're privileged. If you support Bernie, he's less electable. He has a worse chance against Trump, and therefore you're rolling the dice.
No poll has ever shown
and that's
that.
exactly where I'm going, right? Because that just gets under my skin a lot, right? Because they've been saying for 6 months or longer that this is all about, never Trump. We've got to beat Trump, and Hillary's the better candidate to beat Trump. But there's no evidence to back that up, right? They just say, well, look, she's battle tested, as if her unfavorables can't go even lower. They've been going lower. I mean, if you actually look at all the polls, everything they say is totally BS. And yet we're told that, again, we're the privileged ones because we're willing to risk a Trump presidency. No, you guys are the ones trying to risk a Trump presidency. I mean, just today, some polls came out. The Real Clear Politics average poll now has them literally in a tie, except Trump is 0.2% on average ahead of Hillary Clinton. So, right. But we're told those don't matter. Within the standard deviation, yeah. Yeah, we're told those don't matter. We're told, and fine. I mean, look, polls can change, right? But where's the evidence? If you're going to assert that Hillary Clinton has a better chance against Bernie, where is your evidence? Besides your gut, besides just, well, Hillary is more mainstream, and of course she has a better chance. Well, what about the fact that she's the definition of the establishment at a time when people are sick of the establishment? Right.
I mean, why do you think that Trump even got the nomination?
Soared. Steamrolled every other candidate.
I mean, granted, they were such a clown show, right? I mean, it was such a bunch of nincompoops, buffoons, and douchebags on that scale could hardly have been conceived 10 years ago.
Yeah, but I think he did well because, I mean, it's a total false narrative, but people bought the narrative that he's somehow outside of politics, right? I mean, which again, it's bullshit. Like, he's not. He is the definition of the establishment. He's given money to Hillary Clinton multiple times. He's given, he's been a part of that elite class his whole life. But yet the reason he's done well is because, he curses at his events. He's not one of these cookie cutter politically correct politicians, right? Doesn't that send a message that maybe the American people are just sick and tired of Washington established? And yet you want to run the person who's probably the most establishment, most insider Washington politician that you could find. And, she's going to mop the floor with Trump. Mm-hmm. Really? Because, again, and it's not necessarily that the polls matter at this point. I don't know. I'm not a statistician. But what I do know is that when Bernie Sanders is averaging 10 points better than Trump, in terms of beating Trump, he does every poll, he's beating him by double digits. Hillary Clinton wins some, loses some, but it's always within the margin of error. I mean, look, you could say the polls don't matter, but you're taking a risk. You're taking a gamble on your gut, right? You think in your gut that she's going to win, but there's no data, there's no evidence to back that up, and yet you want to tell us that we're the ones.
Well, I also think that I don't know, at least the feeling I've had amongst people that I know, colleagues, friends. I'll totally admit, I don't have Trump supporters on my Facebook feed, thank God. So I don't have to see the people outed for their closet racism and xenophobia. But I do in some ways feel like I see that in its own way happening when people who I thought cared about progressive issues, about ending our, dependence on fossil fuels, about war. All these are things that I thought they cared about, and then to come out and support a candidate like Hillary Clinton when you have a clear alternative to that candidate is something that it's really, to me, taken off the mask of some people, and going to be difficult, honestly, moving forward to feel like we're in this together, that we actually are working towards the same issues, because I feel like it's exposed a lot of their own privilege that they haven't recognized. When I hear Hillary Clinton's stump speeches, I am not moved. I'm disgusted because I see her silo people based on identity politics into what they're supposed to care about, right? So, as a Chicana, as a woman, I am told that the issues that I'm supposed to care about are solely reproductive rights and immigration. And I'm not told that, or her speeches don't speak to me as someone who says, but I care about immigration through the lens of also saying, like, why are economic policies totally decimating Latin America? I mean, people don't want to be forced to migrate. So I'm not interested. I mean, absolutely, put a Band-Aid on it. Right now, as far as immigration goes, like, we do need to find some short-term solution to deal with this crisis of millions of people living in the shadows and being threatened with deportation. But the root of it is something else that I'm really interested and passionate about solving. And none of those issues are ever discussed in Hillary Clinton's campaign. As a womanist, as a mujerista, I care about things like war, right? Who are the biggest, who make up the casualties of war? It's overwhelmingly women and children. When I care about things like, she'll talk about abortion, and as someone, a woman of reproductive age, it's like, but I'm even thinking, like, I might not even be able to have a kid because of the state of our environment. Like, I don't know if there will be oxygen at the point when I am still alive and my child is alive. So these are issues that I, as a woman, as a Chicana, care about, and yet I get siloed into, well, they're going to take away your right to abortion, and they want to deport people. So to me, it exposes how much of an echo chamber she's in, and just taking these talking points from people who really have no idea what it's like to have this lived experience.
Right. I think that's very true. But that also, I think we're going to get to empathy here in a little bit. But there was something else that I wanted to talk about that you brought up. It was also, like, as far as foreign policy goes, it's not as if Hillary Clinton's hands are clean as the Secretary of State, or that Bill Clinton's hands were clean as the president, in terms of some of these tremendously damaging disruptions in South America and other places in the world that are causing this immigration crisis. I mean, Syria, for example. Just say Syria, right? I mean, it's total clusterfuck.
Right. Well, Honduras. I mean,
Honduras
was
Haiti. Right.
Haiti. Yeah. So I want to pick up on a point that you made, though, which is kind of like, this primary has been a way of kind of seeing where, quote, progressives, and I'm doing the air quotes again, where they actually really line up. Because before, this election, caring about money in politics was a progressive issue, right? Like, all progressives agreed, like, money in politics is a corrupting force, and money from Wall Street is pretty terrible, right? It's particularly bad, right? Because they're responsible for wrecking our economy. How in the world can we trust politicians that take millions of dollars from Wall Street? Well, now I'm hearing from a lot of, quote, progressives that, oh, that's not a big deal. Every politician has to do that.
And look, Obama did it.
And look, Obama did it, right? And so you're starting to see war, right? We're told that, hey, you have to be, if you're a progressive, you pretty generally need to be anti-war and against military conflict. And yet we've got now we're being told, oh, no, you're not a realist. You don't understand how the world works. If you don't get, Hillary Clinton's foreign policy, then that's because you're naive and you don't understand anything. Wait, but I thought you told me you were progressive. Yeah. So when did the definition of progressive change, right? When Hillary Clinton became the front runner of the Democratic Party, that's when the definition seemed to have changed. And now you can see where people's sort of true colors are.
Well, there have always been people who wanted to own that label. I just wanted to say something in passing before I came on to it. How Henry Kissinger, right? She said, you ask her,
my God.
right? I mean, what if you're one of the millions and millions of Americans who hate Henry Kissinger and think he should be in prison, not shaping American foreign policy, right? I'll bet you if you poll people today, especially of the generation who's supposedly more conservative, right? I'll bet you if you polled the boom generation, hey, should Henry Kissinger be in jail? I'll bet you they would say yes, right?
Right, absolutely.
But of all people, and Bernie goes up and they say, well, who do you listen to on foreign policy? He says, I don't listen to Henry Kissinger, right? That's a selling point. I mean...
Yeah, absolutely. Right, and in what world do progressives like Henry Kissinger?
None,
right?
None.
That's what I'm saying. So again, this argument over who's... I mean, look, there's one thing to say. I think if you support Hillary Clinton and you say, look, I like Obama, I like, steady as we go, I like the status quo more or less, I mean, hey, a few incremental things here and there, then it's rational to support Hillary Clinton if that's how you feel. If you feel like, hey, things are pretty much the way I want them to be, again, tweak things here and there, then Hillary's your candidate, right? She's going to continue most of the policies of Obama, right? But you can't have it both ways. You can't say that you want the status quo and you're a progressive. Those two things are mutually
exclusive, because we're, the status quo is untenable.
Right.
So, and that, I think, so let's move on to that, because that was something I really was excited to talk to the both of you about, especially you, Rebecca, because I already had the chance to pick Jared's brain about it. But, so, the interesting thing is progressives often, they have this focus on populist movements, on community, on broad basis of support, right? Part of the Bernie narrative, just as an example, is we're getting small donations from many people, right? But that's not, if you want transformational change, you never get people to vote for transformational change because they're all too afraid, right? The only time large bases of people will support transformational change is when there's a collapse that's currently taking place, right? And people are desperate and they're terrified. But usually fear creates inertia in people where they're like, well, maybe capitalism is horrible, but I'm too scared to contemplate a world without it, or how we get to that world, right? And so one of the problems I think that often progressives have is they focus too much on building community networks and on building broad bases of support, when what they really should be doing is going in and kicking ass, right, by any means necessary, because it's just small, because what usually changes the world, there was a famous quote that a woman said, and I can't remember her name, but I don't want this to be my quote at all. This is definitely somebody wise than me said, never doubt that a small group of concerned citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. So, if you think about it, that's every revolution, that's every transformational change, is a small group of people who just absolutely refuse to compromise, who are fanatical in their beliefs. Slavery, obviously it was many people, broad groups of people, but we talk about John Brown and other anti-slavery and abolitionist martyrs. We talk about the leaders at the time, people who were just absolutely stalwartly unwilling to tolerate a system, that even the anti-slavery candidates like Lincoln were invested in keeping, because they didn't want a foundational principle of society to collapse, right? But they didn't want the Civil War, but that was the only way to end slavery, was for a lot of people to die, right? And, I fear that with each passing day that we don't address the problem of capitalism, the ultimate body count is rising, right? So sooner or later, capitalism will inevitably fall of its own weight, right? I mean, I think that the moment is I love I love some of my favorite analogies. Like when Martha's Vineyard is threatening to go under, and we're all told that we need to pay millions of dollars to build a seawall around Martha's Vineyard, and the poor sections of Providence, too bad for you, buddy, right? The south side of Providence goes under, right? But Martha's Vineyard gets preserved, right? That's when you're going to see things start to collapse in a hurry, is when climate change and these other global threats start to put pressure on everyone everywhere, and governments become increasingly obsessed with preserving the privilege of the elites, right? Mm-hmm. It's interesting how Puerto Rico is not a good example, because Puerto Rico right now is like dying, right? Everybody is leaving the island mm-hmm. because of this massive Wall Street engineered debt crisis, right? Because of their hunger for Puerto Rican munis, right? And a couple of other things. But Puerto Ricans have the legal right to leave, and no one can stop them, so they are, right? So Puerto Ricans won't revolt. There won't be a revolution in Puerto Rico because they can leave. They can move to the mainland, mm-hmm. right? Mm-hmm. But it'll be interesting to see what happens in about, in the next few years, once Puerto Rico is all mansions with no one to serve the rulers, right? Mm-hmm. Because all the slums are empty.
So, based on our previous conversation, and I want to get Rebecca in on this because, I think you're sort of have a theory or a view that there needs to be this sort of collapsing moment when, that catalyzes people to revolt. And that's the way that you're going to get transformational change. I don't necessarily agree with that, but I think that's where I thought you would agree with that.
Yeah, no, I more or less do feel like desperation and discomfort leads to action. Unfortunately, I think too many people in this country are still too comfortable, and I say that like kind of wincing at the same time, because I see how much people are struggling, and yet I do think that if we aren't fighting now, then what's going to make us fight? Right. If we're already here and what's going to make us fight, I unfortunately think it does have to get worse. Now, I think that I do believe in like a parallel system that I ideally would love to see, organized. And if people could, I have this dream of everyone just not paying taxes at the same time and just starving what is there and directing it into a parallel system that is providing local community-based services that our taxes are supposed to be providing. Because there's nothing like more shitty to me than, as a working class person, paying my taxes and knowing that my taxes are going to fund like war and prison for other poor people. Mm-hmm. So I'm like, I would have no problem paying my taxes, and I do pay my taxes, but I'd have no problem paying my taxes if they were funding things like the healthcare that I could have access to, but instead I'm paying my taxes and I'm still stuck with student debt and unaffordable healthcare. And so I'm like, if we could just kind of, I really do believe in the power of organizing. I do believe in the power of community groups. It has to be culturally appropriate. It has to be from the ground up. But if you could take that money and that work and just direct it into, say, like, we're not going to be funding our police departments. We're going to be funding community mental health services instead of that. Like, there is so many things where we could just like redirect it, and that's kind of a dream of mine. So I say that because while I'm partially believe that like it has to totally collapse to like, the fire has to burn so the soil can be refertilized, there is work that we can be doing while we do have some type of structure in the meantime, and that's deepening these community networks.
Well, I think my response to that is twofold. So first of all, I think that the moment of crisis is so much closer than people are really willing to entertain. Like, yes. You talk to, you talk to boomers and they're like, yeah, we know we screwed up the world, but we'll be dead before it comes to a head. And I'm like, some of you won't be, right? And obviously it'll fall most heavily on our generation. Although I think technically we're different generations.
See, but I think we're already living through the crisis. I don't think there's a moment that's going to come where it's a breaking point. I think it's a dispersed thing. Like the world, to me, my pushback is just that the world is more complex than that. You don't have these moments where everything happens all at once. I think there are parts of society that are in crisis right now. I mean, Flint, Michigan, but it's not just Flint. Like the water's not drinkable. We do see collapsing societies all around the world. And so when will it come to sort of upper middle class America? I don't know. To some degree, again, certain people are sort of being sort of sniped off by the system. But I think it's sort of analogous to the way Christians and evangelicals think about the rapture. Like if you think that there's going to be this moment when everything collapses and the fire engulfs everything, then it's sort of intellectually you kind of say, yeah, so there's no point in doing anything until that comes, right? And I think that's the danger that I see in that sort of line of thinking is if you think there's going to be some crisis moment that's, impending, then you sort of have a hard time in your mind thinking, well, I should be working towards something now, which I think that's the reality.
Well, that's a valid point. I think that there's truth in that, but my response to that, and I had another thing I wanted to say too in response to your point, is you talked about if we don't pay our taxes, we defund the police. And the interesting thing is, so it looked like for a second the asset forfeiture thing was going to go away, but then it didn't, right? So just to bring our listeners up to speed, asset forfeiture is where the cops just take your shit and that's it.
Robbery,
right? They simply take your shit. You're not convicted of a crime. You may never be arrested of a crime. They just take your stuff and they use it to fund their departments, and that's it, right? It's not more complicated than that. And the ostensible purpose is that the asset forfeiture program, the original idea was, you seize drug money or you seize obviously stolen goods, right? And then you blend that money back into law enforcement by, it goes into a pool and then the various law enforcement agencies get a cut, right? And so, the goons on the ground who take the stuff, they get a percentage of what they take, right? But the idea was it was supposed to all be proceeds of crimes, but it's now gotten completely out of control, right? And in fact, in most cases, asset forfeiture arises from situations. It's not large amounts taken from big time, cocaine dealers, right? It's tiny amounts taken from helpless people who are never charged with a crime, right? Because it's just not worth it to them to go to the courts and demand that the cops give them back $1,000 they stole, right? And the appeals process for that is so lengthy and requires so much legal work.
And the burden of proof is on the victim.
Is on the victim, right? And so you just can't get your money back. So the cops just take your stuff. And I don't want to say that I have an unnuanced view of the cops either. Like, this is not, obviously cops are people, and the character of a police department varies widely depending on where you are in the country, who's in charge of it, right? Like if you look at the character of like Arapio's department in Arizona, it's quite different than the character of, I don't know, say presumably various communities in Rhode Island, I would hope, because they're like openly racist in Arizona, and hopefully they're more at least covertly racist.
Right, Joe Arpaio.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like Arapio, yeah.
Oh, okay, yeah.
It's like I never say John Boehner, I say John Boner because that's how his name is.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh, that guy should be. He should be.
He's a dick.
He's a horrible human being.
Yeah. But they all are. But so I wanted to say that like that's the response of the machine. You take away their funding mechanism and they just start stealing your crap even harder, right? Because there was this outcry. I was talking to Jennifer Siciliano about Woonsocket because their police department is completely dependent on this forfeiture program, right? And it was looking like it was going to go away. They're like, well, we'll have to fire a bunch of cops and we'll have to stop seizing assets and oh God, right? But fortunately, they were saved from this horrible fate by the restoration of the asset forfeiture program. Because I'm sure every police department in the country just screamed to high heaven, we need those stolen funds, right? So, if that's your response is let's engage in collective action to starve the police departments, the response of the machine is
Yep.
trigger a crackdown, right? Work harder to steal. And I would say, like, there's definitely truth in what you're saying, Jared. I agree with what you're saying. Like, one of the problems, one of the flaws in my worldview is it does become difficult to work on incremental positive change, right? And especially when so much of what you do on a day-to-day basis is farce, right? Like, you go to a committee meeting, I mean, you work really hard on this issue, and you're very passionately involved, and you go and you want to have a debate of the issues, and as a result of that, you need to be taken seriously and to be seen as somebody who's passionately involved in the issue. You go to these committee meetings that are a total farce and kind of an insult to the very concept of democracy, right? Mm-hmm. So you're right that if you're thinking there's going to be a moment of collapse anyway, it's very difficult to resist the desire not to work for positive change in the moment. And I have to agree with you on that.
Yeah.
But I do think that you underestimate like the degree to which these moments of collapse can happen quickly. You know, if you look at historical moments of collapse, right, you can see, like, looking back, you look at the perspective of history, and there's this long, slow event, but then there's a spark that sets off the powder keg that's been being built for ages, right? Like in the Arab Spring, one dude lights himself on fire. Civil War, Dred Scott decision, right? French Revolution, I'm sure there was something similar, right? And all throughout history, you can find these like moments where here's a thing that went too far and then everything fell apart.
Right. But I think the ruling class has learned that to some degree and tries as hard as they can to stop things like that from happening. So like, I think that when, you know, again, look at the 2008, you know, economy collapsing, right? I think Obama, you know, saw the writing on the wall and everyone in the ruling class was like, holy shit, if we don't bail out these banks, if we let this, you know, sort of go, then we really will have a revolution, a mutiny on our hands potentially. So there are times when they step in and they say, look, we've got to somehow, you know, dampen this a little bit so that it doesn't become this catalyzing moment.
Well,
I think they've learned
the
that.
other thing is, and I talk about Americans being uniquely, I'll be nice here, naive, ignorant. I usually say stupid, but I think there is something, I don't know if it's in the water, I don't know what it is, but other countries, you look at what's happening right now. I was reading, I believe it was in the UK, don't quote me, it was either the UK or New Zealand. But I want to say UK, it was the National Health System.
They're both islands.
But they wanted to start charging $5 copay for a doctor visit. And people rioted about a $5 copay, thinking that this is you know, absurd that we would have to pay to see a doctor. Not that they aren't paying because it's a tax system or anything, but on an individual basis, be charged per visit. And people took to the streets over that. And in this country, people have like a unique sense of apathy, of tolerance for bullshit, of trust in illegitimate, fucked up systems. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that we've only had one revolution in this country. And as Americans, people look and they say, well, we had the revolution, you know, this country gained its independence, and, you know, we settled shit. Whereas other countries regularly rewrite their constitutions. Every 50 years even, they might go back and say, what has changed since we became a country? I mean, if you look at the history of Europe, these countries have existed, or territories, you know, but countries like, you know, regions, Persia, Prussia, whatever, it's not Persia, Prussia, it's changed, divided into nation states, yada, yada, yada. But they have a longer history to look back on and say, well, of course we didn't get it right in one revolution. You know, there are going to be several events that come up that we're going to need to look back and maybe redo some shit because we don't get it right every time. In Latin America, I mean, when we talk about Mexican history, you have to say, like, well, which revolution do you mean? I mean, this is something that's more palatable to other people. It's not so scary of a term. It's like something that normally boils up
Right.
and happens and gets taken care of, and then inevitably, 2016 there might be a revolution somewhere, but and even that's not going to get it right. But this country seems to me at least, to be very weary of any idea of a revolution happening.
There's a lot of deference to authority.
Yes.
Well, so I think that's a very interesting point, and a few things
For all of our talk of rugged individualism, in my experience, this is a nation of sheep.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, so here's, I think it's a little more complex than that. Here's how I would analyze it. Okay, I think that for the people that authority has served, namely white men in this country, the institutions of power traditionally in the United States have protected that class of people, particularly wealthy white men, right? And I think what you're seeing now actually is that beginning to break down. This is what I think Trump represents. I think Trump represents the loss of deference for authority actually coming up in this white, among white men who now don't trust the government to protect their interests, which is a shift, right? It hasn't been that way for, basically our entire country's history. So that's, okay, so the people that are protected by the institutions, well, of course they defer to them because those are the institutions protecting their power and maintaining the hierarchy, right? Then everyone else, I think the reason that there's not more of a mobilization is distrust. I think it's that and we've seen hopeful moments like the 60s. There was actually a lot of hopeful social movements that were working together. There was a lot of solidarity, but I think the problem that we exist in right now is that the folks that aren't protected by those institutions, in other countries, they might have more social trust and cohesion and be able to join together to work to overturn something. I think the reason we don't see more revolutions in this country is because, and I think capitalism has a lot to do with it, we're bred into this culture of distrust, and we don't necessarily, I see this happening on the left. Like the Bernie, identity politics, all those things are ways of putting wedges between people, working class people for the most part, to say, oh, you're this type of person and you don't get my issues, and you're this type of person, you don't get my issues. And there are some important points to make there, but I think in general the reason, we're just left in this sort of disillusioned space. Now they've got their sort of revolution. No one's really defending the establishment anymore. So I think what you're saying has been traditionally true, but you're starting to see it change. The question is there going to be some way for leftists, for marginalized people to build enough social trust to actually push for something that could be, for positive change?
Well, I think I would respond to that by saying that earlier you said something like, well, the ruling class is getting better at this. Right, and that is my worst fear. That is the nightmare that I am most afraid of the future. Is that finally the ruling class figures out how to perfect tyranny, right? Because the only thing that preserves us from tyranny is their failures. But I think that the thing that saves us is the thing that always saves us, which is that their contempt blinds them, and their contempt is written into them as part of their quest to become part of the ruling class. If you're born into the ruling class, you spend your entire life segregated into a bubble, right? You go to private schools and private colleges, right? Jobs are something you get by calling your friends.
You have private transportation systems.
You have private transport. Everything, you are completely isolated from everybody else, right? And in a way, you could be forgiven for believing that everybody else exists to serve you when your entire life, everybody else exists to serve you, right? But a really ambitious climber might still remember what it was like to be at the bottom, and their greed might be limited. But they're going to have kids, they're going to give their kids all their power in the Rolodex in the private schools. And the kids will not have that experience, and so they won't have any way to defend themselves against the outcome of their contempt. Because eventually, we're seeing it now, right? Only a complete contempt for the voter could say, the way to fix Social Security is to reduce inflation, right? That's a death by inches, right? That's that's the death of 1,000 cuts.
Well, but I think that's right. Look, I think Hillary Clinton is not guaranteed to beat Trump, but I think she's still the likely next president.
I don't at all.
Well, we could go there in a second, but let me just stipulate that that's what I think, and I think that that's showing you that they are getting good at managing society's crises in a way that we don't ever get to those rock bottom points. Again, Puerto Rico is an example. They just, Obama's talking about this agreement, right, where they're going to have this oversight committee, managing the payments of Puerto Rico. They're not solving the problem. They're not actually going to go in and say, hey, you know what? The human rights of Puerto Ricans should take precedence. That's not what they're going to do. They're going to say, all right, we'll give you a little bit, but we're still going to collect our money eventually. And so that's the type of thing that you see from the powerful, is that they understand that they can't make it so bad that we revolt, that they need to every once in a while lift the lid off the stove or off the pot so that a little steam escapes, and then you put the lid back on. And it's like you said, it's sort of a slow death by attrition. That's what I worry about, and that's what I see happening. So I just don't know that we're going to hit a rock bottom. I think we have to be building, like Rebecca said, a parallel legitimate structure that could eventually, hopefully, become a legitimate government. But, that's what I think we need to be building, something that's an alternative, rather than saying, let's wait till things hit rock bottom and then we'll build on the ashes. I don't think the ruling class is going to let it get to that point.
Well, that's not quite what I'm saying. I'm not saying we should wait until it collapses and then rebuild. I'm saying that that we should focus on being prepared for and managing the collapse, because I believe that it is inevitable. Right? So you're saying basically that you don't believe that it's inevitable, which...
Well, I'm saying it is crashing. I mean, we're experiencing the crash. I mean, climate change is happening. It is causing problems right now. Like,
right,
economically...
But you haven't yet been asked to stomach a $500 million seawall around Martha's Vineyard, and that will happen. As sure as the sun rises in the east, they say within 10 years the seas are going to rise 6 feet because the Antarctic iceberg is going.
Yeah, but we were
asked. If the sea rises by 6 feet, you will be asked to stomach that. Right, and it's going to be presented as something that's a fait accompli. It's already done. You just have to tolerate it.
But we were asked to bail out the banks, and I'm saying again, yes, there are going to be increasingly terrible things that happen. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that it's not going to get worse or anything like that. I'm just saying I think we're already living through the crisis. And it depends on what position in society you occupy, but. I think if you're in a black community, for the most part, a poor black community, you're in the crisis. Things could get worse, but I mean, they're already really fucking shitty. And so that's what I think, again, thinking that it's all going to happen to us all at once. I don't think that's how it happens. I think it creeps up on us. It's like, if you want to think of it as a fire analogy, forest fires tend to go off in different directions, and some places get spared and some don't. And it's not all consuming all at once. There's different pockets that happen. I mean, again, I think Puerto Rico is on fire right now. 40% of the people in that country are in poverty. Here in the United States, 1 in 5 children lives in poverty. We have kids drinking lead water. I mean, and that's just that, and that's still pretty good compared to the global standard of living.
Not only is the governor, from whom the ultimate responsibility stems, not only is he still the governor, right? They're all still they're all. None of them have been, to me, we should see heads on pikes, right? Literally, prison is too good for a crime of that magnitude for the governor and for the city managers that suspended democracy so they could do that.
Well, I think the same thing about the housing crisis.
Right.
I mean, what those people got away with is, and then they got bonuses.
Yeah.
They got bonuses for driving the economy. And what was it, $16 trillion worth of wealth in terms of...
household.
Yeah. So it's $16 trillion.
$2 trillion of retirement.
Of retirement savings, right? That is a massive, massive, theft. Basically, they're saying, "Hey, we're going to take away $18 trillion fucking dollars of your wealth in order to subsidize our bonuses."
And the only thing Goldman Sachs got nailed on is they screwed rich people by selling them bonds that were designed, products that were designed to fail, and that's not allowed. Right. So that they had to pay for.
Right. And that's just a slap on the wrist. It's a slap
on the wrist.
Yeah, it was supposed to be $5 billion, but if you actually look at the details, it's like $2 billion. Yeah, it's like that's a fucking drop in the bucket for them.
Yeah.
I mean, it's what Matt Taibbi talks about, a writer for the Rolling Stones. He wrote a book, I haven't read it, but the premise is that there's 2 different judicial systems. There's the justice system for most people. You get caught with marijuana in a certain state, you get a criminal record, that's what happens to you. But if you're HSBC, one of the largest banks, in the world...
We have separate prisons.
Right, you have white-collar prisons. And Yeah, I mean, if someone even goes to prison, right? Most of the time, these banks that do, like HSBC, so what they did, to be clear, is they laundered terrorism money, like money from terrorist groups, and they laundered money from drug cartels. We're talking
They
billions of
have special
dollars
windows built into the bank
to take all the cash.
That
Yep.
much money.
Yep.
So they're literally laundering money for these, they're complicit in these operations. No one goes to jail. No one gets criminal charges. They pay a fine, admitting guilt, right? They've admitted that they did it, and they pay a fine just to get it, to move on. And that's the justice system that we have.
And even
for
that's kind of unusual because usually they're not even required to admit fault.
Right, exactly. So that's what we live in. We have a system that works for normal people, and then we have a system that is for the corporations and the very wealthy, and it's a totally different system. This is what, I think what's really interesting is one place I agree with libertarians a little bit is there's a common hatred of crony capitalism. Like, if you talk to some true libertarians, they'll tell you, no, we don't, what's going on right now is just government agents working with corporate agents and colluding together to build a society that works for their interests. I agree 100% with that. That's exactly right. Now, where we differ is that I'm very suspicious of corporate power, whereas they're not necessarily, and there's an emphasis difference. But
Well, they also lack empathy, which is the next thing I want to talk about.
Right. So yeah, and that's a good point as well. But again, it's just we are living through the crisis, in my opinion. There are so many outrageous things happening right this second. I mean, all you have to do is be slightly informed about what's happening in the world, and it's enough to be just totally outraged and to make your head explode. The fact that people aren't organizing, to me, sort of is evidence against your theory, though, that we need to hit rock bottom, or that needs to be, because that should be already happening, is my point. And so the fact that it's not means there needs to be something else in the equation. I think what that something else has to be hope. I think it has to be trust.
Well, sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, no.
But, I mean, and again, I wasn't alive in the 60s or the 70s, but I think a major difference between the types of actions you saw even from students taking in the 60s and 70s compared to student activism today.
Right.
And I know you and I, Jared, talked about this a lot in college. Occupy was going on, and we were kind of like, why aren't more students up in arms about this? Now, I think something that is different is we are, in the 60s, students were at a university, but they weren't taking on the student debt that they're taking on now, right? So, when we're in college these days, it's like, for me to ditch class and go protest is me just, taking on some more debt to go fail a class that I need to we're so economically starved that it creates I mean, we're in positions where people will go on strike. Thank God people aren't filling the jobs, knock on wood, for Verizon right now. But I wouldn't be surprised if people did go and take those jobs and said, we're gonna come in for a bit because I'm so desperate economically.
Right.
And so it's like activism works when people have some semblance
some resources
of to fall back on.
Absolutely.
But when you are just treading water to just stay afloat because that's the only thing you can do to survive. I mean, skipping work or skipping school is not an option.
Yeah.
Right, and that's what I'm talking about. I'm sorry.
No.
Were you finished?
Yeah.
I didn't mean that enough. I apologize. But that's what I'm talking about, is that there's a tipping point when your life has no hope at all, right? At some point, you just throw in the towel. And at that point, you become the regime's worst nightmare because you are capable of anything, right? And the beauty of the pressure cooker, right, is that when you put people under enough economic stress and you fill their head with enough nonsense in high school about patriotism and freedom and enterprise and whatnot, right? You can push really hard down them. You can crush them to where they only have the tiniest sliver of hope of supporting themselves, right? But that's what I'm saying, is that the pressure doesn't let up. Like that release valve you're talking about, it doesn't. Overall, I think I agree with you. You're just seeing the pressure keep ratcheting, and every so often a little bit of steam is released, But in many ways, for many people, things are worse now than they were before the Great Recession. And the beauty of social media, there's a lot of problems with social media, but the beauty of social media is that we have the ability to be more aware of it, right? Whereas under normal circumstances, certain news stories wouldn't be actively suppressed, but they'd be passively suppressed as being not newsworthy enough, right? Whereas now they get spread virally, right? So like stuff like George Zimmerman selling the gun that he murdered a kid with for $100,000, like that goes viral.
Yeah.
Right?
So I want to build on your point though. It's because I think it's not just there's an economic price to protesting and being, organizing, things like that. And this gets to your point as well, Grant, about social media. It's also that there's a social price, and that's what terrifies me as well. Is that it's not necessarily the government being authoritarian and censoring us, right? It's that we censor each other. We censor ourselves. I mean, I experience it all the time when I talk to people and they go, "Wow, I saw your posts on Facebook, man. You sound really mad." Like, yeah, I'm fucking pissed.
People always ask you,
right?
Is Rebecca okay?
They're like, is Rebecca all right? Because like she just seems really angry, and I'm like, well, yeah. I mean, there's a lot to be angry about.
Anger is the only sane response.
The subtext, though, and this is what I'm getting to. The subtext is that in a way they're expressing a social judgment. They're kind of like, oh, so you're one of those kind of fringe people, huh? And like employers, all the time, it's standard operating procedure for employers to punish workers who get out of line, right? And hey, I saw you posting this stuff on Facebook, and I mean, hey, you might want to tone that down a little bit. So it's not just that we're economically strapped, and so we don't have the resources or the time. It's also that we get punished socially because, again, being a Bernie Sanders supporter, there's all sorts of social punishment that comes with that of what labels are applied to you and that type of thing. So that's scary to me.
Absolutely. But something else I'd like to say is like successful movements are not, it's not a coincidence that successful movements are often spearheaded by women and people of color. Because when you already have limited social mobility,
right.
If you have a shit job and you have no chance of ever climbing the ladder, walking away it's not easier because you're already given a smaller piece of the pie. But the punishment of it is different than if someone who does have more social mobility, because they're weighing on their mind, well,
there's less to
if
lose.
if I walk away, I'm totally ditching the good life that I could potentially one day have. But for people who that's like just an unattainable goal,
But I think that's exactly, though, again, part of the ruling class's strategy. This is what Hillary Clinton does so well, right? She has this sort of PC, hey, everybody needs to have a fair chance, right? Women need to have a fair chance. People of color, so they're trying to say to those people who are oppressed, hey, we're going to change that for you. So don't give up on this capitalist system. Don't give up on the ruling class because, hey, we hear you. And we're going to make sure that you have a chance just like, your white male counterparts. Right? So that's what neoliberalism is really all about, is it gives it this faux legitimacy by saying, hey, no, we want to make it fair. Everybody should have a chance. Yeah, everybody has a chance at getting fucked. That's basically what they're offering to us, so that you think that you can rise up, right? And so that's, again, to me, another example of them trying to lift some pressure off let some steam out of the pot by saying, okay, we're going to give you equality, right? We're going to give you social equality, so that you feel like you have the same amount to lose. But all that does is means you feel like you're not.
I don't know though, because like what you're ultimately talking about is you're describing out and out lies as relieving the pressure, when I would describe out and out lies as pushing down harder on the lid.
But people, and I agree, but people believe the lies for better or worse. I mean, people buy into that narrative, and so that's what's dangerous. Is that
increasingly though they don't believe the lies. I mean, that if you look at Hillary. If you look at Donald Trump, the only person who is more hated than Hillary in the presidential race was Donald Trump. Like, every other candidate polled better than those two.
Yeah.
Everybody hates both of these people.
But if you listen to the people that do support Hillary Clinton, one of the things that they'll say is, she cares about LGBT people. And it's
what the hell are they gonna say?
Well, but that's my point, though.
I'm jumping on a bandwagon because I have no core principles. They're not going to say that.
Well, but what I'm saying is for at least the 40% that have a favorable view of Clinton, that narrative is somewhat effective. And even if it is built on a lie, that's the danger of it, is that it is a lie, but it's still effective in achieving what it's trying to do, which is trick people into thinking that she actually is progressive and it does care about, people of color and women and LGBT people. Like, she's getting away with it with at least 40% of the population.
And she's not even a good liar. It's just that people want to believe the lie. That's the thing that irks me.
Well, exactly. And to me, that's the problem. And some of the people that I can't stand the most are these, frankly, a lot of white dudes who are pundits, for Vox or Washington Post. These people who get up and they defend Hillary Clinton by saying, if you don't understand that she's the only viable way to improve society, then you're naive and you're an idiot. Right? They're the people who are going out and putting this bullshit narrative into people's brains. And to me, I want to strangle those people.
You're a rich white guy. Your job is to bloviate on TV.
Right.
What the hell do you know about transformational change? Right. You know nothing. You are part of the system.
Exactly. And so their job is to go around saying, hey, look, Hillary's lifting a little bit. She's letting some steam out. She's not, right? She's not. But their job is to go out and make us believe that we're actually, maybe there is some improvement that could be had with her. So I see them as, if they would just go away, more people would see the truth that, hey, no, we're not getting better, we're getting worse. And so then maybe you could have this catalyzing moment where people go, you know what, I've got nothing to lose, let's go for it. But the ruling class, I'm saying, has figured this out, and the pundits are very much a part of it. The media are very much a part of making us believe this false narrative that there is hope in incrementalism.
Right.
Right? Mm-hmm. And no, you don't. There is something to lose. We could
not just that there's hope in incrementalism, but that taking a more drastic approach to these issues is dangerous and scary.
Yeah. Right. I think we covered in a previous podcast. This is a topic. This is, like I said, the squid with tentacles and everything. This is one of the tentacles, is narrative construction that is in everything. It is a big problem. Right. Mm-hmm. And I use the term synthetic narratives, right? Because the Koch brothers, I guess they want to be called the Koch brothers, but the Koch brothers, they fund think tanks to come up with deliberately disingenuous synthetic narratives. Yeah. They, if a white person of privilege tells their authentic narrative of privilege, it's a false narrative, but it's still an authentic one, right? For example, when Clay Pell was running for governor and he talked about his history, it's a narrative, right? It's a narrative that's very blind to the way the world actually works, but it was authentic in that it actually was true for him, right? Mm-hmm. I don't think he was telling us a narrative that was a lie. Right? Whereas in these think tanks, all they do all day long is devise deliberately disingenuous, synthetic, harmful narratives, right? Mm-hmm. It's the modern day evolution of the cigarette ad that says 9 in 10 doctors say tobacco cleans your lungs, right? Yeah, right. It's like, natural gas is a bridge fuel, or clean coal is a thing that could ever exist ever, right? Like these are these artificial, deliberately harmful, completely false. Not even false, but I think synthetic is true, because you can have a false narrative that's still authentic, right? You can have somebody's true experience that they're generalizing in a way that's completely false, right? Mm-hmm. But when you're talking about, it's like the synthetic narrative of the family farmer who lost their farm to the estate tax. There wasn't one anywhere in the country ever. Yep. Mm-hmm. They couldn't find one person, right? Mm-hmm. So it was a completely synthetic narrative, right? But I think that when you're dealing with that, when you're dealing with not even lies, to call it a lie, it sort of cheapens the profound dishonesty of a synthetic narrative that's actively being promoted, right? And if you look at these people, like half of these assholes on TV, it's like their job is to devise and peddle synthetic narratives. Yep. I've talked about David Brooks before. I hate that guy so much. All he ever does, and he'll go on liberal shows and he's the conservative voice. He's never been right about anything, ever. Dude, right?
Have you seen his latest op-ed about, never mind.
I can't stand to read him anymore. Yeah. I can't stand to watch him anymore. Like 2 seconds of looking at his smug face, and I just want to kill my TV, right? Yeah. Right. So, okay, well, this is amazing, and I feel like I could keep talking to you guys forever, but we're coming up on the end. I did want to talk a little bit about empathy, and I think that dovetails kind of into, that's the real challenge for this movement building. Like, if that's your vision, is if you're looking at, okay, we're going to build a movement based on bringing different communities with divergent interests together, right? The glue that makes that fit together is empathy, right? No other glue will work. And we've tried the glue of mutual self-interest many times and it always fails, right? Like, I remember when Progressive Dems, we were working really hard. I mean, I did some volunteer work for Marriage Equality Rhode Island. I was on their board for a little bit to get same-sex marriage in Rhode Island, right? And when we finally got it, we lost a number of people in the gay community who at their heart always wanted to be Republican, but there was no space for them, right? They wanted to be conservative jerk-offs, but also they were gay, right? So like, we, instead of encouraging empathy, right, between groups, we said, hey, we're all gonna work on this social issue together because we need a win, right? And so, but then as soon as we got that win, a big portion of them left the coalition, right? And so, you know, there are, not that it's the same at all, but there are certainly people who are pro-legalization who are hardcore libertarians.
Oh, absolutely.
Right.
I mean, that's probably one of the most noticeable. You know, I kind of see it as like an oil and vinegar separation starting to occur in the drug policy reform movement, is that as states fall with tax and regulate and marijuana reform, people then go into the industry, and it's like there are people who are left behind who care about the social and racial injustice of what the drug war is. And marijuana prohibition is part of that. But
once marijuana's legalized, they got their drug, and now they can go make money off of it, and so they're done working for social justice.
Right, they're done
Those are all
forever.
just-
In fact, they want opiates to stay illegal. They want to increase the schedule. Right, and so like, there's without empathy, you don't build these movements to create transformational change that you're describing.
Yeah.
Right,
Yes.
and like, Americans are uniquely trained to lack empathy.
Yes.
But empathy is like, that's the thing that, if you want to have hope, right, that's the thing that you hope for. And if you look at American culture, like, look how hyper-segregated we are. Providence is particularly bad because Providence is, you know, even in other regions of the country, you know, when you have racial segregation, there's like, this region of the city is racially segregated, and then on the fringes you have some mixture, and then, you know, so you have these regions and you have these border regions. But Providence has these like micro-segregated neighborhoods where like, this block is all black, the next block is all white, right? Every one of these people goes to the black school. Every one of these people goes to the white school.
Yeah.
Right? So like, even though they're side by side and the neighborhoods can be tiny, right? Segregation is still so rigidly enforced by a variety of mechanisms, you know? And so when you have people isolated, when you have communities isolated to that degree of, it's so difficult to even build a common language to talk about social justice movements, right? And a big part of the problem is that I think a lot of these underprivileged communities, these, even underprivileged, that's not the word I want, but like a lot of these oppressed communities, they're so used to the white savior, and Americans just love their myth of the white savior, right? And so like, even if you're a social justice warrior who happens to be white, right? Like, just by going into a black neighborhood or a Latino neighborhood or any of the other hyper-segregated micro neighborhoods in Providence, just by going into that neighborhood and saying, hi, I want you to help me build a movement, just by doing that, you're setting yourself up for failure. Because if you were a member of that community, how would you see that person as anyone but an outsider who can never understand your concerns, is interested in using you to achieve some sort of strategic or tactical objective, and then will leave as soon as they get their cookie, right? And you would have plenty of historical justification for having that worldview.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
You know, and even and we have this problem too where even when we do get people of ethnic minorities, it's not always a problem, but it is a big problem, I think, in the progressive movement here in Rhode Island, is that, yes, they can be ethnically diverse, but they went to Brown. They all went to Brown, right? And like, there's something just fundamentally different about a well-dressed Latino man from an upper middle class background who went to the best private school they could find, who wants to generously give back to his people. There's something just fundamentally different about that as opposed to somebody who actually grows up in that community trying to empower it and become part of a broader movement, you know? And far too often we get the former rather than the latter. And that's like almost the best thing we can come up with, you know? I mean, even I get very frustrated with how much Brown University has infiltrated, because like so many of like the passionate social justice people who have the economic room in their lives to care about these things and to work on them, so many of them, like, you know, they're slumming, you know? I mean, I've talked to Brown grads where they think they're poor, they've built an identity for themselves where they're poor, right? But, you know, when I'm in a meeting with them, we talk to their parents, and their parents are like, oh yeah, well, you know, we've got like $200,000 set aside for her when she's ready for it, but she's not, you know, she hasn't been willing to take possession of this money yet, right? And it's like, if your parents have set aside that money for you, I don't care if you live in an apartment building with like 5 other people, right? You can always pull that ripcord and call daddy, right? And like, that's a fundamentally different experience.
Yeah,
you know?
and yeah, I mean, and obviously, I mean, we say that a lot, and I guess the question is, yeah, so what's to be done, right, from that?
The only thing that can, if you want to have hope, and I'm not even sure that the goal should be to have hope, but you think we should. So if you want to have hope, the only thing that offers hope is empathy, right? The only thing that can bridge that gap between people, right? And that's also the thing that we have that the ruling class doesn't have. The one weapon we can use against them is their contempt inevitably must blind them to the common humanity of the lower classes.
But I thought and I think you're right, that the objection to, I think the reason Bernie Sanders, has lost is because he hasn't been, white progressives have not been able to create enough space for women and people of color. Like, I think that's the diagnosis, and I think it's exactly correct. Now, I'm not interested necessarily in assigning blame.
Right.
We could do that, and I think that could be instructive in some ways. But the question is sort of, well, you said that if you go into a low-income community and you're someone who went to Brown, which I agree with, the person's going to say, how can you understand my situation, right? You don't get it, right? But that's what empathy is. Empathy is attempting to understand. But if there's automatically a priori just this rejection, you cannot understand, then I don't know where we go from there, right?
Well, I think we have to focus more on the broader problem of empathy. Like, right? I mean, you're right? The burden can't be on the oppressed person to make the first move, right? But then the question is, as the person who is less oppressed, what is the play, right? But then, you have to have a broader conversation about how do we change the culture to allow for more empathy, right? How do we, over time, get people to raise their children to have compassion for other groups? And the way that you do that is you desegregate things, you desegregate schools, you desegregate populations, you get them to experience each other's lives, you expose them to cultural.
Yeah, but what we're just talking about is that capitalism segregates us de facto. We've gotten rid of legal, quote, legal segregation, but now we have de facto segregation. So,
it gets worse every year.
Yeah, so it's a chicken and egg problem. You're saying we have to build empathy by desegregating, but how? Because the only way to
how do we desegregate without empathy?
Yeah, yes. Right. So
hey, you're the one that wants to have hope, man.
Well,
tell me, brother.
I think it's hard. And I think that's where I am right now, is that there are no easy answers, and I think we need to stop. I need to stop fooling myself into thinking there are easy answers. I think it's just a matter of try the best you can and work at it and work at it and work at it, and that's the only way that anything ever gets done in positive terms in terms of changing the world. And now more than ever, because the odds are really stacked against us, so it's going to be an uphill battle. I think you just got to keep trying. I think that as someone who did graduate from Brown, I'm aware of the tons of privilege that I have. Is it going to stop me from trying to do what I see is right? No, because I see the alternative as giving up. So I'm not going to give up. I'm going to try to learn the best I can, and I'm going to make mistakes. I'm going to try to have an open mind when people call me out for my mistakes. And I think that's more or less the best that I can do. And there is no magic bullet. But, you know, I think that's getting to where the real crux of the problem is like, if you're oppressed, you don't have a lot of privilege and wherewithal and resources to actually fight because you're in such a precarious situation. But if you're privileged, then you don't necessarily understand where the oppressed people's point of view is. So the question is like, what gets done? I mean, like,
right.
You know, I mean, obviously it's problematic to have this savior mentality, and that's obviously an issue. And I'm not saying that should be kept, that model should be kept at all. But what, I mean, who then? If it's not the white savior, who is the savior? Are we all gonna like? What are we gonna do? I mean,
I don't know. Maybe Rebecca's the savior.
Yeah. Well, I think that, again, the lesson, I mean, for real though, that like Sanders has shown is that if you don't have a leftist working class socialist movement led by women and people of color, it will not succeed. And that's just a matter of fact. And I think white dudes need to wake the fuck up and realize that. Like, it's not just that, you know, we all need to, I don't even think it's a question of empathy. I think it's just there needs to be a principle of we can't lead any type of movement without having women and people of color being at the forefront of it.
Well, I think I couldn't really agree more with you than that. I think that's a good note to close up the podcast with. But I think, Rebecca, you should close us out. So what are your closing thoughts for the podcast today?
Sin mujeres no hay revolución. That's my closing, is you gotta have working class people of color and women at the front because, but I kind of, and I know we want to wrap up, I want to kind of go off what Jared was saying. Being at the front is different than, like, all of these movements liberate all of us. So it's in everyone's interest to get involved in this. Like, a feminist movement and a women's right movement liberates men as well. LGBT movements liberate, you know, heterosexual people as well. Like, it's in all of our interests to be part of this. So give the mic to the people who have the lived experience to talk about that. But it's not, these movements aren't things that it's like shift, and I don't want to say shift the burden onto people who need to carry that weight. Like, you know, women, people of color, working class people need to carry that weight. Because frankly, like, we can't carry that full weight, right? So we're going to need your help, but get involved not because you think you're helping us, but because like, so I mean, I love this thing with empathy, and I think we do, I mean, I'm never going to say we don't need more empathy, but at the end of it, I do kind of think it is self-interested in everyone to say, you too will benefit from this. Like,
well, there's my fear with that, and I know I was gonna let you close it out, but my fear with that is, like I said earlier, the problem is if we all collectively pursue the self-interest of one part of the coalition, because it seems to be right then the play that's most likely to succeed, as happened with gay marriage, right? You know, we couldn't get progressive taxation, we couldn't stop them from trashing Medicaid, you know, but we could get gay marriage. You know, we couldn't regulate and tax marijuana, but we could get gay marriage, so that's what we did. And then, dadgum, they left the coalition, right? Or even worse yet, and more insipid, you know, they used the fact that they were part of enhanced, like Brett Smiley, right, who is not progressive on anything, former mayoral candidate, for those of you who don't know, not progressive on anything, but he's gay, and he worked for gay rights, you know, so him pursuing his naked self-interest becomes,
well, this is also part
like
of,
a tagline,
you know,
for being progressive.
Jared and I have talked about this as well, like how dangerous falling into relying on identity politics can be, and siloing our issues and not seeing the connectedness of them. And I think that's what I've lately been very, very frustrated with, you know, to kind of go back to what I said earlier, is, you know, these presidential candidates are talking to me in a very narrow way and not seeing that, like, I'm a complex human being with a lot of fucking concerns and a lot of issues. And you know what? Like,
No, man, you're a uterus in the skin zone.
So exactly. So that's what I am to them. And like these movements, I'm not in favor of single issue movements. Like I don't think though that is successful. I think that it's short incremental change. And again, I don't fucking like incremental change. No successful movement won through incremental change. And I think that it sets us up to, as the marriage equality movement in Rhode Island experienced, like you said, people just jump off the bandwagon as soon as their little pet issue gets passed.
Yeah.
And I really do feel like identity politics has carved us into fight. It's been a cannibalism of the left in many ways.
Cannibalism that is awesome.
When we really have a bigger enemy that we can collectively be fighting that's fucking us all.
So how about this? It's a battle. We need women and people of color to be the generals and send the white dudes to be out on the front lines because they can, right? I think that's the point. We mix up front lines with leadership. Like,
yes.
So
also mix up, after Occupy, and people are like, well, we can't have movements with leaders. And I'm totally against that because
I know.
what
I'm
leaders
totally
are.
for movements with leaders.
Movements need leaders, but what leaders do is leaders build other leaders. Like, that's what a leader is. It's not a boss, it's not a commander. It's someone who takes, action, but through that action and through their values, inspires others to do the same. We need those people. We should not be saying, like, fuck leaders. That's like, yeah.
Well, thank you guys so much. This was amazing. We ran long, but you guys are awesome. I really feel honored to have had you on the podcast. I don't want to be too glowing because we really should end the podcast on a down note. It's tradition. I think, taken holistically, everything we've been talking about the last 20 minutes or so is pretty depressing.
Yeah.
So I think we've satisfied that burden, but I'm just really pleased to have had you guys on. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you all for listening, all 5 of my listeners. Really appreciate your tuning in.